Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Peter Reed, and I'm the director of the Sanford Center for Aging here at UNR. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to be able to welcome you to our distinguished speaker event today. And man, I tell you, I really love these events because it truly represents that opportunity for us to bring that campus to community, or what do they say, gown to town, and all these things. But so we really bring out a wonderful group of people to hear a wide range of different topics. And I certainly want to thank some of the folks who are here with us today. All of our faculty, thank you very much for joining us, and the students who are here. And I do understand that there's one group of students that's going to have to leave early to head out to a class, so we don't want to prevent them from their routine learning, but hopefully they'll benefit from this as well. So if they get up and leave before it's over, it's not because they're bored or unhappy, but just because they need to get to class. And so we'll understand when you get up and do that. And certainly also want to thank Mary Scow, who's here from Senator Reed's office, and Katie Pace, who's here from Senator Heller's office, and Dr. Schwenk, who I'll be introducing and asking to make some comments here in a minute, is our Vice President of Health Sciences and Dean of the School of Medicine. And then all of our community partners. We have so many different organizations that are represented here today, and I'm not going to try to even name all of you, but thank you so much for coming and being a part of this. And many of our volunteers from the different programs that we offer, RSVP and SOS, are here joining us as well. And I know our speaker, Victor Marshall, is also pleased that his wife, Joanne, and her sister were able to join us as well. So we have family in the audience and all kinds of good folks. And I really appreciate you coming and appreciate the turnout. So with that, I will actually invite Dr. Schwenk to come up and make a few comments, and then we'll get on with the program. Thank you.
Dr. Reed, thank you for giving me the opportunity to welcome you as well, to welcome Dr. Marshall to Nevada. I understand it's his first time here, hopefully not his last. I want to comment on two things. There are many reasons why this is special, and I love this sort of distinguished speaker series concept in which we bring in notable experts from around the country, have them expose us to their ideas and allow them to see what we're doing. But I like this for two reasons amongst several. One is the issue of community engagement. Peter referred to that a bit. President Mark Johnson is absolutely committed to connecting this university to the rest of the community. And the fact that we can bring in a speaker like this on a topic that touches so many people in so many ways, professionally and personally, and from volunteers to researchers and teachers and clinicians and everybody in between, I think is very, very exciting. And that leads to the second part, which is the interdisciplinary nature of this work. There's probably no field, no topic that is more interdisciplinary than aging policy, care of seniors, medical issues, mental health issues, social policy issues, health services research, everything else. And it's a place where everybody can come together, as Dr. Reed has organized with the Research Collaborative. And I just think this is a great example of the kinds of things that we can do when you get lots of different groups together. You see the co-sponsorship. That's a good reflection of how interdisciplinary this is. So welcome to all of you. I think we're in for a great treat with Dr. Marshall. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schwenk. And now I have the opportunity to introduce our distinguished speaker today. And as you know, this is part of a series that's hosted by the Sanford Center for Aging. And I always say that we are for aging. And that means that we don't view aging as a disease, that there's so many other elements to the aging process because it's a natural life process that we're all sharing. It's probably the one thing we all have in common. And so this topic today is not health related. Right, and this was one of the goals for the speaker series, was that we would have some of the talks really focused on different health issues around elders and that population and their needs, and then some that are looking at kind of the macro level issues and the societal issues. And so Dr. Marshall is a sociologist, received his training at Princeton University, and then has been on faculty at McMaster University and led the Center on Aging at the University of Toronto, and then moved down to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is where I got to know him. And he, at that time, was the director of the North Carolina Institute on Aging when I was a predoctoral fellow there. So I benefited from his mentorship and learning about the different issues. And then I actually just last year had the opportunity to see him give a similar talk to this as a keynote address for the Canadian Association of Gerontology, and was just absolutely blown away by how he was looking at the aging process and the global trends of aging and the, sort of the macroeconomic and political economic implications of that. And so I think you're in for a real treat today, and want to welcome Dr. Victor Marshall.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here and to meet. I had a chance to meet with several of the people in the Institute, and I was very impressed with what's going on here. I do understand some of the students are going to have to leave early, which is even more reason why I will be trying to speak fast. The other reason is I haven't picked up Southern slowness since moving to North Carolina, and also, I have a very long paper to present to you. So let's see if this thing works okay. That's me. All right. So it seems like old people have been a social problem for many decades, but the way in which this social problem has been formulated has changed over the decades. I've been in gerontology since 1968, by the way. From an academic point of view, interest by social scientists in aging began to build during the Depression years of the last century because of the employment or unemployment issues and low income patterns that affected older individuals. The University of Chicago sociologist Ernest W. Burgess, as a member of the Committee on Social Adjustment of the Social Sciences Research Council, in 1940 called attention to the absence of information concerning the behavior and adjustment of the aged. Burgess also noted that society could be characterized as maladjusted to the individual or to its older population rather than the reverse. However, the bulk of Burgess's work, and indeed that of his colleagues at the University of Chicago, stressed the adaptation or adjustment of the individual to society. The Committee on Social Adjustment, in its 1948 report, Social Adjustment in Old Age, established and supported research at Chicago, such as that leading to Cavan and Associates' landmark book, Personal Adjustment in Old Age, and supported the Institute for Human Adjustment at the University of Michigan, directed by Clark Tibbetts and Wilma Donahue, all pioneers of gerontology. These were the first of what were to become, by today, these handbooks were the first of what were to become today, many, of course, hundreds probably of handbooks dealing with aging. And they played a large part in establishing adjustment studies as the core of the field of the sociology of aging, and for that matter, of the broader field of social gerontology. At the time that I was starting my professorial career in 1970, there was an area of sociology called social problems, and introductory textbooks in sociology and social problems textbooks in sociology, when they treated the elderly at all, really treated them as social problems. A social problem due to the growing numbers, but also because older people lacked they suffered considerable poverty during the Depression years and lacked governmentally provided health insurance. In my view, gerontology is not a discipline. Rather, it is a field on which, so to speak, many disciplines and professions play. As the field of gerontology developed, it focused on the adjustment of the individual to aging rather than the consequences of aging at the population level for society. This debate, which was stimulated by the publication by Cumming and Henry of Growing Old, the Process of Disengagement, that was in 1961, and produced a vigorous reaction by Havighurst and Newgarten at the University of Chicago, and George Maddox and Erdman Palmore at Duke University. This debate preoccupied people who called themselves gerontologists as I was starting my career back around 1970 and through the 1970s into the early 80s. It was all about whether adjustment of the aging individual was fostered by a withdrawal or disengagement from active social ties and life, or required ongoing activity. The activity theorists pretty well won that debate. However, the research showed that the three major determinants of well-being in later life were health, economic security, and social integration with others in society. In retrospect, this is so obvious that one wonders why so much time, energy, and research dollars was spent to find that out. Within the academy, and perhaps especially within the compass of what was at the time called the Gerontological Society, all that was pretty much at the level of the individual. It seemed to me at the time that more than half the papers presented at the Gerontological Society meetings dealt with the activity theory, disengagement theory debate. However, people who were mostly not gerontologists had been making public policy and critiquing public policy since the end of World War II, particularly around pension systems, but also in developing Medicare systems for older people and for people of all ages in most civilized countries. By the beginning of the 1970s, old age pensions made up an average of 63% of social transfers in member countries of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The problem was often attributed to demography, as the simple growth in numbers of the aged population, but it was only one step further to argue that for the most part, the challenges of an aging society are not caused by population aging, but by public and other policies that got us into trouble, or the lack of policies that take population aging sufficiently into account, while leaving the aged as a kind of scapegoat and claiming we can't afford all these old people. With this as a broad background, I'm turning to the first substantive part of my presentation, and we get to, this should say globalization. Yes, good, okay. This slide shows the basic demographic pattern. The top curve shows percentages of population age 65 and older in the developed world from 1950 and projected to 2050. The lower green curve shows the percentage of age 65 and older for the developing world. Note that in the developing world, the significant increases are just beginning to happen now, although of course they reflect changes in fertility rates and life expectancy over the previous 50 or more years. In the United States, here's a projection from by the US Census Bureau of what we can expect of this country. It shows the percentage age 65 and older to level off at about 20% by the year 2035. I'll just let you look at that, roughly in the middle, or towards the right-hand side, I should say. Now, here's a bar graph of the, got it, yeah. Here's a bar graph from the United Nations showing the percentage of the population age 65 and older for the world's oldest countries. You see Japan and Italy at the top, with 19.5% of their populations age 65 and older. As we just saw in the previous slide, it will take the United States 20 years to get to that point. The US is currently ranked 15 with less than 13% of its population age 65. This chart was actually published 10 years ago, but it's about exactly 13% right now. What I wanted you to take from this is that while some of the so-called older countries have not been doing too well over the past decade, none of them, with the exceptions perhaps of Greece and Spain, is an economic basket case. And in none of these cases can economic woes be attributed to the older population. This leads me to suggest that there's no direct or inevitable relationship between the demographic structure and economic well-being at the national level. But all these countries are reasonably highly developed economically. And as the World Health Organization has noted, while developing countries became rich prior to becoming old, the reverse is true for developing countries. With gains against tropical diseases coupled with falling birth rates in places like India and China, we can anticipate that many developing countries will become old before they become rich. Population aging then in itself is cause for concern on a country-by-country basis or on a regional basis, which makes it a concern for international organizations, including on the scholarly side, the International Association on Gerontology and Geriatrics. And the Commission on Population Aging and World Health and the World Health Organization are also concerned. And I recommend this report to you, The Graying of the World, Aging Matters. So I don't want to say that aging doesn't matter, population aging doesn't matter. But I want to underline the importance of global population aging and note that there is some excellent work going on by gerontologists in the field of public health at the academic level and by international organizations such as WHO and Help Age International. These concerns focus on health and health care provision in relatively underdeveloped countries, especially those that are rapidly aging. This is a wonderful and important field for young gerontologists to get into, hint, hint, because there's so much to be done. But I want to caution you against panicking about these problems. So is population aging good or bad? If the populations of civilized nations are willing to invest so greatly in health care, which has something to do with helping people live longer, does that not imply that we are in favor of population aging, that it's a good thing? Yet many people view the aging of our population as a social problem. To consider another contradiction, is it not true that in general we've applauded the fact that people are having fewer children than in earlier generations? Remember ZPG, zero population growth? Some of you will, some of you are too young to remember. It's seriously argued by scholars such as Paul Ehrlich, for example, that we need zero population growth or close to it if we're to save the planet, because the more people, the larger the carbon footprint, the faster the global warming, and the nearer the end of the Earth as we know it and its people. Low fertility is the main cause of population aging globally. So saving the planet from ecological disaster means learning to live with an aging or an older population structure. However, many voices are saying that population aging is bad or dangerous because we cannot afford to have so many old age dependents. A key flaw in that argument is the assumption that people over age 65 are dependent and non-contributors to society, just as supposedly are children. The demographic concept of dependency ratio with adults over age 15 and younger than 65 supposedly being the only productive members of society. That concept of dependency ratio, I view, frankly, as one of the most harmful barriers to clear thinking in this area. Perhaps the argument of the alarmists, or at least the alarmists in this country, is most often and most loudly made in relation to healthcare costs. But the major cause of increasing healthcare costs is not demographic, the major, that is not more old age dependence, but it's inefficiencies in the system and profitability of the medical industrial complex. Good. Let's put these costs in perspective. These are busy, but all you need from this slide, which was published by OECD with data from 1980 to 2010, is the general picture. The left chart shows the United States as the top curve with average healthcare spending per capita at $8,500 in 2010, whereas it spent only $1,000 per capita in 1980. The comparison countries are other advanced economy OECD countries in descending order of expenditure: Switzerland, Norway, the Netherlands, Germany, Canada, France, Sweden, Australia, the UK, and New Zealand. So the US clearly spends a lot more per capita on health, and while these in healthcare, and while these costs have accelerated in all of the comparison countries, the US costs have far outgrown most other countries. The right-hand chart more or less tells the same story. It shows the increase in percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, that these same countries spend on health. This ranges from a low of 8.9% for Australia to the United States figure of 17.7%. Why does the United States pay so much for health care, so much more for health care than the other OECD countries, than any other OECD country? Because it is private sector health care, its private health care sector is so powerful, health insurance is so privatized, and even Medicare Part D, when enacted, did nothing to curtail the importance of the private pharmaceutical sector. Obamacare has been highly successful in addressing the health care needs of the poor since 2009, but look how far the U.S. has to go. 5 years ago, our public spending was more than all but one of these countries, Norway. You should be looking at the purple segment of the left-hand bar here. The left-hand bar in the top purple segment. And now look at the white section above it for private spending, and the blue segment of the bar is out-of-pocket spending. Again, this is 2009 data, but nothing's changed much since then. There is the United States, left-hand bar, spending almost twice as much as the median for OECD countries on pharmaceuticals, the most privatized component of our healthcare system. I suppose all this expenditure, whether public or private, would be fine if U.S. health outcomes were better, but the USA does not have the highest life expectancy in the OECD. This is too busy to read, but again, the blue bar, okay, is the average mean life expectancy in the OECD countries. And if you move 4 bars to the left, you find the United States. This little diversion into national expenditures for healthcare is just a way of showing that how much we spend is not the defining cause of life expectancy. There are numerous other social determinants of health, including the degree of inequality in a society, which influences life expectancy, and nor is increasing life expectancy the defining cause of health expenditures. Given how much effort and resources all civilized nations have devoted to enhancing health and delaying death through medical care, one might assume that we in the United States and people elsewhere believe that living longer is a good thing for individuals to do. It beats the alternative. Aging has its limitations. As Bob Hope said when he turned 70, "I still chase women, but only downhill." And living to a very advanced age requires some adjustments. When he hit age 100, this great comedian said, "I don't feel old. In fact, I don't feel anything until noon. Then it's time for my nap." Like it or not, people in the United States, as in almost all parts of the world, are living longer than people used to. And this requires some innovative thinking about how to accommodate the aging population. Meanwhile, fertility, while higher in the United States than in most developed countries, is much lower than it used to be. And now several underdeveloped countries have seen reductions in fertility there as well. As a result of increasing longevity and decreased fertility, there are proportionally fewer people in the younger age groups and more people in the older age groups. But do we think that is a good thing? One often hears the view that this is not a good thing, and this often boils down to can we afford it, and who will pay the bills for all these senior citizens? This should be my position in the argument. Great. At both the person level and societal level, aging offers new opportunities, but also new challenges. These challenges have to be viewed in an international or global context. Some countries, particularly developing countries, will face severe challenges as their populations age. But I will argue that countries that are currently highly developed, such as the United States, have reasons to be concerned as well, but not to panic. The position that I'm arguing against has several labels. It's been called demographic determinism, voodoo demography, and apocalyptic demography, like the world is aging, the sky is falling, right? I will address what I will more gently call this as alarmist demography. Ellen G. alarmist demography, as it has been carelessly used or perhaps carefully misused by interest groups in the politics of aging. I suggest that we look not only at the arguments by the alarmists, but the nature and sources of these arguments. To apply a well-known turn of phrase, I will argue that when it comes to age, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. However, I assert that we should be fearful about those who argue that the sky is falling because this country or the world is getting older. As gerontologists, we would be wise to pay attention to what is happening in the broader world of interest group politics and the shaping of public policy that is relevant to aging issues. It seems every day that we see a news story about how the growth of the older population is a bad thing that will lead to a fiscal crisis. We cannot afford public pensions or Medicare for this growing demographic group. There will be too many old people and not enough young people to do the work and generate the products and services needed for everyone who's old, as well as the young. And if older people do work, many pundits question whether they are as productive as younger workers. Older people have been dubbed greedy geezers and so on. I want to briefly address 3 initiatives that represent alarmist demography. I hope you will agree to me that it's a rather humbling that professional gerontologists are not the only interest group in this game. And indeed, we are far from the most powerful. So let's first talk about the Central Intelligence Agency. This is the most dramatic example I'll give you. It's an older example, but they released a policy paper in 2001 under the CIA did, under the title Long-Term Global Demographic Trends Reshaping the Geopolitical Landscape. Prepared by the RAND Corporation and based on a strategic planning conference with so-called, quote, experts from academia, the business world, and the intelligence community, the report asserts that global demographic trends will have far-reaching consequences for the key elements of national power, economic, military, and political, within the larger global community. Allies and rivals will cope differently, some better than others. This is not the language of the Journal of Gerontology. This American report begins with a powerful summary of global demographic changes, and it sees these changes as potentially threatening to American security and power. By 2020, according to the report, the world population will have grown to 7.8 billion, of whom only 4% will be Americans and just 13% from the Western Hemisphere. Regions will vary greatly in the extent to which their populations are old or young, and this has great potential for global differentiation of economies. This report also notes that by 2020, I'm quoting here, the world will be older and far less Caucasian, and it will be far more concentrated in urban areas. So that by 2015, for the first time, more than half the world's population will live in cities, and that by 2050, the size of the age 65 plus population will have tripled to about 1.5 billion people, or 16% of the total. Nevertheless, many countries will see significant youth bulges, and the countries projected to have the largest proportion of young will be, they got it right, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Iraq. They got it right from a security point of view, right? This report does not mince words. It says, the industrialized world will record an unprecedented crisis of aging beginning early next decade. The report came out 10 years ago, right? And reaching critical mass in the mid-2020s. The CIA report in its crisis mode cites OECD reports and that population aging will lead to decreases in GDP growth rates in the developed world. For example, quote, all things equal, the impact of aging on GDP growth rates will be a decrease in Europe to 0.5%, in Japan to 0.6%, and in the United States to 1.5% over the 9-year period 2025 to 2050. And that the average bill for public pensions and health care in Japan and Europe will grow by 9 to 16% of GDP over the next 3 decades. What I find interesting about this report is that the Middle East countries with these dangerously high youth bulges have indeed been a source of tremendous upheaval, have they not? But do you really believe that the inability of the developed world to put water on these flames has to do with the increasing proportion of older people in these countries? And what is that argument? My next example shows the links of international security concerns to the structure of capitalism. Sorry, that was the last example. This example is the Global Aging Initiative Program, a 2-year study taken by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which has the same concerns for international security. This task group from CSIS got going back in about 1999, but it's still functioning. You can go on their website for it. I'm going to read you what's written on this slide, which appeared on their website in 2001. The overview of the program gives its rationale. Over the next 3 decades, Japan, Western Europe, and the United States will each undergo unprecedented demographic transitions characterized by a dangerous combination of rising elderly populations and flat, or in many cases, negative labor force growth. As a result, all face the danger of large structural deficits, declining savings, and slower economic growth. And this transformation initially will be limited to the world's leading economies suggests an important strategic dimension. These nations account for 2/3 of world GDP and play a dominant role in global security and economic stabilization arrangements. How the advanced nations adapt to the new realities of aging has far-reaching consequences not only for the aging nations themselves, but also for global economic growth, international financial markets, and the larger global community. As with the CIA report, the CSIS Global Aging Initiative is concerned with both economic issues and global security issues. But in many respects, these are the same thing, because global security in a global world economy, in effect, protects capitalism. The project was led by 3 co-chairs, including a former president of Deutsche Bundesbank, a major global investment bank, and its 82 additional commission members, quote, comprised of senior government officials and business leaders with the support of subject experts. It includes politicians, investment bankers, insurers and pension fund executives, major drug company executives, representatives of the International Monetary Fund, OECD, the World Bank, and the International Chamber of Commerce, and of think tanks such as the American Enterprise Institute. Its current initiative, nowadays, the future of retirement in East Asia, was co-launched with its partner, Prudential Financial Services of the UK. This slide gives examples of apocalyptic, or sorry, what did I call it more gently? Alarmist language. So a special report on global aging from the Guardian newspaper, but based on a report of a CSIS conference held in Tokyo, is headlined, "Aging Populace is Killing Economies," says study. This story begins, "The rapid aging of the developed world is pushing the global economy towards the edge of a demographic abyss. An international panel warned yesterday. Its report from Tokyo concluded that urgent action was needed by world leaders to prevent protracted aging recessions and financial turmoil, and that, quote, the major social crises of the 21st century will be the byproduct of labor shortages, end quote. These in turn are caused by population aging accompanied by a larger, older, non-working population and fewer people in the workforce." A policy paper issued by Goldman Sachs and authored by Maureen Culhane is entitled "Global Aging, Capital Market Implications." At the time, Robert D. Hormats, vice chairman of Goldman Sachs International, was on the CSIS Commission on Global Aging. So there may be a connection between the report and the organization I'm talking about. At any rate, it gives more or less the same picture, but focused on world capital markets as influenced by global aging. It saw aging as having a positive effect on capital markets for the next decade, which was the first decade of this century, but painted a crisis scenario when taking a long time frame of 50 years. Demographics is seen as, quote, the problem, and, quote, the culprits are low fertility rates and higher and increased life expectancies, end quote. The report suggests that GDP growth could slow dramatically for countries with shrinking working age populations. And that while no single solution will solve these problems, a menu of solutions is required. This includes, as noted on the slide, changing the promise and reducing retirement benefits, moving to a more privatized pension schemes while abandoning or reducing pay-go, pay-as-you-go systems, and keeping people in the labor force longer. I suspect that these recommendations would not find a strong endorsement from the Gerontological Society of America or other organizations of professional gerontologists, not to mention academicians in the healthcare sector. The Global Coalition on Aging, this is the third one. I have a brief mention here. It's very recent in its origin, but it reinforces my point that it's not gerontologists who are setting the policy agenda, but global reach business interests. I know less about this initiative to say its website is not very transparent, actually. But I do, in fact, see some good ideas in it here, so I don't want to say they're totally off base or that this organization should not exist. The Global Coalition on Aging appeared on the scene only recently, as I say. Its webpage declares that population aging is the most important global challenge of the millennium. The implications of these demographic realities call for far-reaching work, lifestyle, business, and governmental changes that extend to virtually every aspect of society of society and business. We need effective solutions now to ensure our fiscal sustainability in the coming decades. The coalition is funded through membership dues headquartered in New York City, but it claims, quote, to operate globally through our geographically diverse membership base. What it advocates may strike you as good or bad. The coalition will advocate, its website says, for policies that recognize the challenges brought on by the increase in aging populations and the shifting proportion of working versus retirement age populations. We will support government and workplace policies that promote funding of health-related diseases. They really meant to say cures for such diseases, healthy living, new ways of saving and retiring, working beyond traditional middle age, and technology and innovation to increase productivity into the new middle age. Here are the coalition members. These partners may have a lot of goodwill, but they also have a financial stake in policy framing an aging world. The member companies of the coalition represent various industry sectors, including health, pharmaceuticals, technology, and financial services. And the coalition, again, from its website, views aging as an opportunity for productivity, value creation, and wealth enhancement. The coalition will not, it claims, lobby government, but rather its goal is to shape the public dialogue to increase the understanding of policy decisions that affect aging populations. And that's to say the members are here. I won't list them for you. They're on the screen. You can see the kind of companies they are. So who sets the policy agenda for aging? Here's my point. We gerontologists have our own ideas, but many of them, in fact, are research-based about the aging society. But the public discourse is being shaped by organizations that have their own stake in an aging society. And they may well be acting for the public good, but they also have strong interests for the corporate good. I've, over the years, learned much from the scholarship of John Miles, now at the University of Toronto. But what stands out in my mind is some verbal advice that he gave me a few decades ago. Pension policy, he said, is not made by gerontologists. It's not made by people who necessarily or professionally have the interests of old people at heart. Rather, pension policy emerges in a struggle between government and the corporate sector over the control of billions of dollars. Corporate capitalism requires capital in the private sector. The struggle between the private sector and the public sector, which ostensibly acts in the broader public good, affects pension policy. And I would argue healthcare policy and other dimensions of age policy are so affected. To the extent that John Miles' argument is accurate, we should all be watchful and wary when the corporate sector or political actors whose main allegiances to the corporate sector tries to influence public discourse about things like pension policy or health care policy. Governments have an obligation to keep the economy going, and in our kind of society, that means support for the private sector. And they have at least some obligation to keep people healthy. But we should be wary when government policies acquiesce too strongly to the private sector or take private sector success as the key indicator of success. A central message that comes across in the discourse that, in a sense, is marketed by the corporate sector is that population aging is the major factor creating a fiscal crisis. It has become the scapegoat, taking the blame for problems that predominantly are not demographic in their origin. Population aging is not, to any large degree, the main cause of our challenges. It is not responsible for rising prices for drugs and health care, for the increased medicalization of later life, nor is it responsible for failures in global and national markets and the ability to maintain high employment rates, or for age discrimination in employment, or the restedness of the young in non-democratic countries in the Middle East. Population aging is not the only reason why people are not productive in terms of being in the paid labor force, which is not the only measure of productivity. There is great cross-societal variability in labor force participation at any age, depending on such things as the duration of education that precedes entry to paid labor, or the extent of withdrawals from work into education that might be staged over the life course, patterns of female labor force participation at various ages, and not least unemployment rates. Public policy can focus on increasing labor force participation of older people by extending the ages of eligibility for state pensions, but there are alternative policy vehicles to increase productivity, even in an aging society. For example, by making it easier for women with family care responsibilities to work, or by reducing unemployment rates, or increasing the normative hours of work per week, or decreasing the number and length of paid holidays and statutory vacation entitlements. All of these things, not that I'm necessarily recommending them, but all of these things could increase the hours of productivity of productive work if that's the goal, the policy goal. For example, an AARP report notes that increased female labor force participation would offset the effects of population aging on the economy in countries like Ireland and Italy. European countries with persistent high unemployment rates have more room to move through reducing unemployment than, for example, the United States, which has much lower unemployment rates. Is there really a crisis caused by global population aging? Former U.S. Vice President Walter Mondale critiqued the alarmist demography approach as applied to the United States of America. Too often, he wrote, aging issues are used as an excuse to promote a particular agenda, such as the privatization of important social protection programs. Social Security and Medicare are sustainable in the long term, provided that we understand the challenges and take reasonable measures to address them. That's Walter Mondale. My direct answer to this question, is there a crisis, is that there is not a crisis caused by global population aging. The CIA reports of the CSIS Global Aging Initiative and efforts of the Global Coalition on Aging have raised the profile of population aging issues, just as Americans for Generational Equity raised the profile in the mid-1980s. We have to accept the challenges of population aging without panicking. And I would argue we have to be wary of the uses to which apocalyptic demography can be put in attacking the welfare state and fostering support for individualistic private sector solutions when collective solutions are likely to work better. How am I doing time-wise? Okay. What should be our concerns? This list, which except for the last is from AARP and refers to the United States situation, is pretty applicable to other developed nations. And for all of these concerns, we should think not only locally, but globally. We should be interested in how the aged are affected by these various phenomena, but not fall into the trap of blaming population aging for these problems. An understanding of global aging is a central task of what Alan Walker called the international political economy of aging. Such a specialty field would examine global inequalities in aging and the effects of economic development on older people in different economic contexts. The role that international government organizations, such as the World Bank, as well as transnational corporations, have on the global political economy as it affects different age groups. These are all topics for investigation and concern, he says. And indeed, understanding the politics of global aging should therefore be an important and very large part of the research agenda in social gerontology. I'm going to conclude on a note of optimism, but don't be too optimistic, the conclusion's long, giving 3 reasons to think that we are not heading for a demographic doomsday of population aging. The first is the compression of morbidity. We know that more people are living to advanced ages. They die later, and this phenomenon is called compression of mortality. But there is also a compression of morbidity, as a number of investigators, James Fries at Stanford, Ken Manton at Duke, and others have well documented. People are not only living longer, but healthier, pushing the time of serious health problems further and further out. The compression of morbidity and its converse, which is healthy life expectancy, or life without disability or serious morbidity, of course, varies considerably globally, and even within this country. This slide shows life expectancy for those who have reached age 65 by state. You can see that Nevada is in the 3rd best or the 2nd worst category. But my home state, that's North Carolina, which is the most northerly of the southern states, so to speak. Not well, that's what they like to think of it. Anyway, North Carolina does not fare as well as Nevada. So there's certainly room for improvement and in morbidity, and this would require creating health policy and public policy, sometimes known as healthy public policy. But in general, the shift of morbidity in the later years should affect healthcare costs, as was established almost 30 years ago by Professor Norlu Roos and colleagues at the University of Manitoba. They demonstrated with an excellent data file from Manitoba that most healthcare costs accrued by older people occur in the final 30 days of their life. And that's been replicated, including by some colleagues at School of Public Health at UNC. And and much of that, part of that at least, is so-called heroic measures in an attempt to keep people alive near the very end. As I say, this has been replicated many times, but research has also established that the later that period of intense care, the dying care, if you will, the lower the expenditures will be, as Fries has shown. This is no doubt because of an increased recognition that a time comes when people should be let go, free to die without intensive medical intervention. Okay, a second reason for optimism, does it say second here? Anyway, labor force. Yeah, second reason for optimism is increased labor force participation at all ages, but notably among women. If we need so much GDP to feed, house, and otherwise nourish everybody, then the larger percentage of that population that's working and contributing to the GDP, the better. We do know that increasing percentages of people are now working not only to age 65, but beyond it. But they are not working too many years beyond age 65. I don't have time to do a gender breakdown on this, but suffice to say Despite large increases in labor force participation, and despite the fact that women live longer on average than do men, they are less likely at all ages to be in the labor force than men. And this slide shows the percentage of population that's over age 65 in the labor force for the OECD countries. And the United States is the black bar there at about 18%, percentage of the population that is over the age of 65 in the labor force. A number of other countries that seem to be doing quite well in general and for their older populations have a higher proportion of older people in their labor force. These include Norway, New Zealand, Japan, Chile, Mexico. The lower labor force participation countries to the left include many European countries that have over the past decade raised their age of public pensions from 55 to 60 to age 65, and with good reason. Given the compression of morbidity in the United States and elsewhere, there is clearly room to increase labor force participation for older people. This slide, which is almost the last one I will show you, is a bit old but fascinating, and it shows that of those Americans 65 and older who are employed, there's been also a marked increase in the proportion who are working full-time rather than part-time. I love it as a sociologist when you get two trend lines which cross each other. Something real is happening here, folks. Something dramatically real has happened. Easy to interpret, right? Increased participation in the labor force will not solve all the productivity concerns of the doomsday prophets, but it has to help, especially if a larger proportion of older workers is still working full-time. My third reason to be optimistic is more speculative, and it suggests that we might actually be able to create more work-free time throughout the life course and in later life through automation and robotization. As the baby boomers continue to pass into retirement, perhaps we can count on automation to maintain or even enhance productivity to acceptable levels. As Sir Adrian Stott wrote recently in June 21st, in fact, issue of The Economist, it is time that you abandoned a bugbear of the declining dependency ratio between the numbers of those working and those supported by them. The fact that fewer babies means fewer workers later on is manageable. Productivity is increasing because of improved education, not only of people through schooling, but also through better computers and advances in robotics. Self-driving vehicles will release millions of truckers, cabbies, bus drivers, and car commuters for more useful work. We will need the labor of fewer people to support our dependence. The increased per capita productivity is one of the most ignored constructs in this whole argument, it seems to me. So robots by region. I wanted to get you in here. Oh, this is broad regions. We are increasingly aware of robotization of automobile manufacturing and the use of robotic surgery, for example, in the treatment of prostate cancer. But there's tremendous room for growth, as this slide, which is limited to industrial applications of robots, illustrates. The use of robotics varies greatly by which part of the world one looks at, but even in the Americas, it's growing dramatically. There is increasing robotics research and increasing application of robotics in healthcare, including some specifically designed to provide companionship, manage small tasks, or deliver health care to older adults. But my critique of the voodoo demographers who think that the sky is falling and that we'll no longer be able to produce the goods and services that we could when the world was a younger place is that it now takes fewer people to create a given amount of goods and services than it used to. We are healthier and better educated. We have used machinery to achieve multiplier effects. There was, after all, an industrial revolution, and we now, of course, have a robotic revolution. And we're continuing with this digital revolution to get more tasks done and more things built with fewer people and over longer stretches of the life course than could have been imagined a century ago. Studying both the cause and consequences of population aging is one of the big jobs of gerontologists. The other being to try to understand aging as a personal, familial, community, or global experience. The aging of our population, and indeed global aging, is for the most part a good thing. And else why would we put so much effort into keeping people alive and so much effort into trying to control against overpopulation, in part to save the planet by reducing our carbon footprint. There is no doubt that we have challenges. My message today has been that you be wary of the doomsayers, the apocalyptic or voodoo demographers who want to blame population aging for a number of the problems that have more to do with the economy, especially the global economy, with social class differences, and with inadequacies in our social institutions. I have suggested that it's important to inquire as to the structured interests of parties who enter into discussions and make proposals about what we should do about our aging society. Powerful messages are being marketed to the public that suggest that the aging society, and by implication older people, are to blame for the current fiscal problems. The old become a social problem again. The gerontology has, I think, moved beyond treating older people as a social problem, and an early period in the history of social gerontology when a similar view characterized the aged as out of step with and needing adjustment to society. By uncritically accepting the specious demographic construct of the dependency ratio, many social gerontologists have unwittingly bought into the alarmist position that youth and old are unfailingly dependent and rely on those in the middle to support them. However, this harmful and distorted view continues to raise its ugly head, as in the alleged demographic threats to world peace that I described. Corporate elites, not least the pharmaceutical industry and the highly privatized for-profit components of the American healthcare system, have often blamed rising healthcare costs on the aging of society in a kind of smokescreen that ignores high profits and the fact that other advanced societies, such as those in the OECD, who have older age structures but more public support of health care, have healthier populations and longer life expectancies. At the same time, if we look specifically at the field of gerontology and our preoccupations, judged, for example, by the content of our major journals and the curricula of our educational programs, we see a high volume and quality of healthcare delivery research and training, but very little attention paid to the role of the political economy and the factors that are shaping public policies for an aging globe. In short, gerontology as a field of research and of application has not aggressively addressed many of the important aspects of aging in an aging society. I thank you very much for your patience. We do have time for questions. Okay. I can't see anybody down here, but shout out. Or how do you want to work this with the mics? We have a roving mic. Am I supposed to go to?
Looks like you get off the hot seat then.
Oh, well, tired people out, eh? Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Great. Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Marshall, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. One thing I didn't mention in the introduction is that Dr. Marshall had a very famous paper back in the late 70s in which he described the emergence of radical gerontology. And I think that this presentation today was right in line with his true colors as a radical gerontologist. So grateful for that. And I know that this discussion is going to produce a lot of conversation and a lot of debates here in our community over the next weeks and months. A lot to think about as we move forward in considering the meaning of aging in our communities and all of the different influences that are playing a role in how we support people in living well every day. So thank you all so very much for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.